Hey everybody, if you clicked on this video, chances are you're looking into buying a kit for your post frame building, barndominium, shop house, or garage. And as you can see, I am most of the way through building my 40x72 barndominium. We're about 95% of the way done, and I've done everything in the process except for the garage doors, and at this point I feel pretty confident that I can give you a good idea of what it's like to build by yourself and what it's like to work with Hansen pole buildings as a kit supplier. So should you order your kit from them? Let's get into it and hopefully I can help you make up your mind. We are the Heart and Home channel. It's my wife and I and our kids quitting the rat race to live simpler lives. And if you're into home building, DIY, light homesteading, or the debt-free lifestyle, then consider hitting that subscribe button as we are coming out with videos every week. And if you're into that kind of stuff, then I think you're gonna find a lot of useful nuggets in there. All right, so the first topic that we need to get into is the consultation and planning phase. I worked with Rachel and she was awesome. As a general note over the whole review, their whole staff was really nice, and just I felt like they bent over backwards to help me. They were aware of the channel along the way, so take that with a grain of salt, but I have no doubt in my mind that they're just genuine people overall. It actually took me a while to get to this design here. I think we went through like 3 or even 4 different designs over the course of like a year and a half before we finally landed on this one, and there was no complaints from them. They were happy to help me, and that was just a really positive experience. They go through and make up like a 3D model of your building, so you really get a good idea of what it's going to look like. And overall, that was a really great experience. Rachel helped me make some decisions that made the building more efficient and got me the biggest bang for my buck, so that was definitely a really positive part of the experience. The second thing that we're going to talk about is the shipping phase. Now this is kind of where things are a little bit hard to review. We ordered this building in 2021 and there was lots of issues with supply shortages and trucking shortages and all of that stuff. So my experience might not be everyone else's experience. Additionally, the way that Hansen works is that they work with local suppliers and have the materials shipped to you. So your experience with the suppliers in your area will probably be different than what I experienced. Overall, I would say that it was pretty smooth. It's definitely easy being able to hand off the responsibilities of that to other people, but I did experience some issues with that. I did only receive half of the soffit initially that we needed. I just remember there being some kind of issue there why we couldn't get the whole thing. Additionally, the quality of lumber that I got was not super awesome, and again, I don't really think that this is Hansen's fault. They just order what's available in standard sizes, and I'm given what I'm given. And my treated lumber the dimensions were had a pretty wide margin of error, much more than I have ever remember seeing in projects that I've done in the past. Granted, I'm not a professional builder, so I don't know everything that there is to know when it comes to ordering lumber, but this seemed out of the normal range that I would normally receive. Additionally, the posts that I got, hopefully these are going to be okay, because some of them looking like they kind of been sitting out forever. They looked pretty old. Looked like they've been sitting out in the yard for quite a while. Obviously it works fine. I did receive some posts that were cracked, and I had to replace one of my posts because it had cracked and twisted so badly that we had to take that down and replace it. But again, like I said, probably not Hansen's fault. It's more on the fault of giving me subpar lumber. I probably won't be working with them in the future, that's for sure. Apart from that, the other issue that I had, a couple other issues I had with shipping, was that I don't live on site. And so one of my instructions was that I needed any shipment to be called in ahead of time to make sure that I was here to receive the shipments. For all my steel shipments, I did get a call, but for everything else, I don't think that anyone called ahead of time to let me know it was coming. So some of my stuff arrived while I was here, some of it would be a surprise in the morning. Here's a little surprise for today. And additionally, the slider that I received had a ton of nicks and scratches on it and discoloration. that I think is going to be fixable with quite a bit of buffing. Obviously at this stage of everything that's going on, it's a little bit hard to replace, so it's stuff that I'm going to have to just kind of deal with if I want to get this done on time. But if I had ordered that stuff myself, that would have been something I would not have. I'd have probably sent it back. So I definitely had some bumps in the road as far as getting my materials, but Justine, their shipping coordinator, was awesome in working with me, very responsive. So it's hard to say where, in terms of like getting notified when shipments were coming. I don't know exactly where that broke down. If you're not living on your build site, you should definitely do your best to make sure that you're notified when things are coming. All right, number 3, the instruction manual. Arguably the most important part of getting a DIY kit. There's a lot of things that go into making a building, and so this thing really make or breaks the experience, in my opinion. I think I spent like probably a few years just absorbing YouTube University content, mostly from RR Buildings, and having watched all that stuff, I definitely had a lot of knowledge coming into this, but wasn't necessarily the exact same way that we did it here. So while that stuff did help, I have to say this was a pretty good instruction manual. Not only do they send you this nice little binder that has everything that's relevant to your project, but they also have a bigger repository online of everything, and you can download that, get it all digitally, so that even if you misplace this, you're still good to go. The one kind of issue that I have with the instruction manual is that it seems to be more targeting the audience of posts in the ground, more towards the simple, what you normally see in a post frame building. I did my posts in a wet set bracket, keeping them out of the ground, which I think is absolutely necessary for a residential building. This one is a little bit more oriented towards that, but what I will say is that if you're the type of person that's going to be building your own home, you're going to be able to figure out what you actually need to do fairly easily. And if you can't, their building and construction questions answering team is really responsive and super helpful. I had quite a few interactions with them, and they were always able to get me answers quickly, and that made sense. So I'd say generally this is a very good instruction manual. There's probably going to be things that you have questions on. But they definitely have a great team to help you work through those processes. All right, so the next thing we want to talk about is the blueprint. They ship you a copy, big old construction copy of the plans. Now this is my first build, so I'm not super familiar with how all of that stuff is normally done, but what I will say is what I did receive was really helpful. They had a lot of like really helpful instructions on the blueprint itself, and multiple views of the same things that were, some things were kind of confusing, and they would have multiple views in there explaining exactly what kind of fasteners and everything to use. So like I said, I don't really know, as a newbie, I don't really know what the standards are for that, but this one was definitely newbie friendly. Having said that, there were a couple mistakes on mine that I think were sort of leftovers from simpler versions of this kind of building that they just forgot to update. So if I was not as careful, I might have missed that and not done things correctly. I guess having said that, just be diligent and overview everything. It was really easy for me to ask them questions about things that I was confused about. They ended up correcting the error that they found very quickly and sending me a new copy. The other mistakes that were on there were just like some minor things that seemed a little off, so I asked them about it and it was pretty easily clarified, but it very much looked like they were artifacts from copying from one blueprint and pasting onto another, and which is, I think, a symptom of just a way that you run a business efficiently. So when you add details that aren't like standard, like overhangs, windows, stuff like that, just look at those areas, and if anything feels off, you won't have any problem getting a hold of them and asking them if there was a mistake. So overall, pretty good on blueprints. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is the materials and how I would say the quality of those things are. As I mentioned before, you know, a lot of times people will build with ply, with like 3-ply posts, and mine was made with these solid posts here. And that is kind of an issue when you take, as long as I did on the build. With applied post, you're going to have less warping, and since my posts were sort of free floating for quite a while, there was time for them to warp a little bit. Now I think those ones do cost more, and I think that they had an option for that. So if you're a solo DIYer like me, I would consider going with some glue lamp posts. As I mentioned, we had this one over here and the corner gets so warped and cracked that we had to replace it. Some of these posts were definitely not as straight as when I originally fastened them in. And that's, I think, just because of how long I took. They said that the building would probably take me 4 to 6 months, and it took me about 9. I think that's a combination of me just working slowly, working by myself, not using heavy equipment, and only really having about 35 or less hours a week to work on it. So you may have a different experience than I did, but if you're going to be a slowpoke like me, then you may want to consider having different kinds of posts. The next thing on the materials are the windows, the standard windows that they give you. The ones that they give you have a J channel already applied to the outside. So, and I am not a big fan of that. I would recommend that anyone who is building a residential space, that you would buy your own windows without a vinyl J channel on the outside. Our buildings has a really great way of doing J channel around the window that will give you a much better mechanical flashing. That keeps water out from getting behind the windows. And the way that this one is, water can pretty easily get behind it by collecting on the top and then flowing down to the bottoms. So with this kind, any kind of wind-blown rain, and you'll get some water behind your envelope. I would say if you are just building a barn, you know, these windows are probably going to be just fine. When I asked them about the specs of the window, that wasn't something that they had readily available. If your county has energy requirements, there's a good chance that you're going to have a very specific kind of window. So being very intentional in ordering windows specifically to what you need, probably not a bad idea. So next we're going to talk about methods, some of the things that I did differently than they specified, some of the things I would do differently next time, and some of the things that I actually really like that they did that I hadn't seen before. Okay, so first up, the thing that I disliked the most about their process was that they had you put on these splash planks very early on. And if you're a noob like me, you're probably going to take a while to make your building. So you're probably going to experience some big warping going on in your splash planks. They wanted me to use these splash planks as like a reference line for all my measurements and everything else. So not only were my boards inconsistent in size when I got them, but very quickly they became warped and completely unreliable in terms of getting an accurate measurement for any of my posts and everything that went after that. So if you follow their instructions and you take a while like I do, you would end up with a very bizarre looking building by the time you were done. I would very much recommend not putting on your splash planks until you're about to put up steel, and instead you do yourself a favor, get yourself a good laser level and a laser reader. I think Stabila makes one that works for both rotary lasers and normal ones, and that will give you a much better result than using your splash plank for your measurements. On their design, their roof or their ceiling purlins are off to one side of the truss. So you have to figure out your own design for how you're going to do nailing for whatever drywall or shiplap or whatever you're doing on your ceiling. If it's peaked, obviously, you know, if you're doing a flat ceiling, this isn't going to be an issue, but I kind of feel like this is a design oversight. So I'll have to figure out something there. Additionally, some of my ceiling purlins run into things like posts or these little braces here. You can see that's in the same spot that a ceiling purlin needs to go. So I'll have to figure out a different solution there other than the hanger. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do yet. One of the other things that I forgot to mention that I really like about this kit and how they do their end walls and the overhangs is that the end truss is actually a little bit smaller. Purlins are mounted with brackets to it, but on the end wall, they go over and rest on the top. The purlin ends up also being the overhang on your end wall. So that just made a lot of sense. For me, I got messed up a little bit in calculating the distances on the end wall versus on a normal purlin that the hangers go. So I got into a little bit of trouble there. I think that's why my leak happened. It's because I messed up on those ones a little bit. And what they recommend you do is after you have marked your main trusses that are next to it where those hangers go, that you actually put your small truss on top of that and then trace it out. That way you're guaranteed to have accurate measurements all the way to the end wall. I didn't see that until it was too late for me, so I didn't get that done. But if you guys do this kit, make sure you do that process, and I think you'll be very happy you did. One other tip that I would really recommend if you go with Hansen is that you do both of your end wall truss bays on the ground. There's quite a bit more work on an end bay than there is on a center bay. So if you can, I would really recommend working with them on getting both end bays able to be done on the ground. What you'll have to do differently from their normal method is that every center truss bay is cut into the same side of the block, and so this end wall here is cut into the other side. So in order for this end bay to be done on the ground, you would have to notch the opposite side of this post and then lift it up and scooch it in that way. So talk with them, see if that's something that you guys can do, and if you can, probably be worth your while. One of the things that I absolutely loved about Hansen Buildings was that they had 12-foot bays, and they were one of the very few companies that would engineer you a building using 12-foot bays. They do have you nail 2 truss pairs together for each post, and so that was a little challenging. I may consider ordering them pre-laminated together in the future. But in general, I probably would recommend that most people just do what they recommend first time around in regards to trusses. But 12, the reason why I like 12 feet so much is that 12 feet works pretty well as a room dimension, and so it becomes a lot easier to hide these big posts inside of closets and stuff like that. You can break up your space into 12-foot sections if that works out for you. I don't think we have any posts except for the ones over in the garage bay that are gonna not fall into closets of some sort. So that worked really, really well. Now, one thing about having 12-foot bays is that there's a lot more room there for warping to happen over time. That's what happened to me, and when I talked to them originally, they told me that you don't need to put blocking in between everything. And I just found that to not be the case at all. I can't imagine how much of a nightmare it would have been to try and screw everything in without the blocking that I put in there. It would have been severely frustrating and taken me even longer than it already did. So if you go with Hansen and you do 12-foot bays, even if you do 10, 8s are probably going to be less necessary, but with 12-foot bays, I would definitely say putting in blocking in the center of your truss purlins is completely necessary for someone looking to build their building by themselves. They say you can just have someone go underneath and wiggle it around for you if you're not hitting them, and that could probably work great for some people, but for me, I'm building this place mostly by myself, and so that was not an option for me at all. One of the other issues that I had was with slumping on the bookshelf girts. What would happen is on the ones with windows, that all that weight rests on the bottom girt, and so I got a lot of bending there. They say that, oh, you could just do the same thing as the roof, and you just lift it up and once you're screwing it in and it'll be fine. But that's really, I really don't see how that could be the case, because you put your Tyvek on before you put on the steel, and if you're moving around your girts while your Tyvek is on, you're just going to shred it up. So what I did, and what I would recommend everyone do, in underneath any window like this, you want to put another 2x6 to really make that the one that carries all the weight of the window as strong as it could possibly be. Now that'll also prevent it from moving later on and possibly distorting your window a little bit and keeping it from working or keeping out water. So I definitely recommend this as a very cheap way to keep your wall really straight and consistent over time. One of the other things that's sort of small potatoes, it's not a super big deal. Normally a lot of people use this one kind of trim for the top here called an F and J channel, and basically what that is that you put it right up against the top board here, and it'll hold your soffit and also act as a cover, a normal J channel cover for your side steel here. And instead what they have done is they use a J channel, which is mostly okay. The issue that I have with it is that there is now a exposed wood just behind the soffit there, so I'm not super crazy about that, but for the most part you can't really tell. So maybe that's something that you talk with them about and decide if that's right for you or not. I think the biggest issue that I have with Hansen's methodology is none of your trims should overlap except for the corner trim on the roof, which is for these trims that go on the side of your roof here. But originally they said not to overlap any of your fascia trim, your J trims, your wainscot trim, and the bottom trim here. And the issue with that is that when you butt them up against one another, the steel is never like perfectly aligned. So you get kind of this profile where things kind of start looking like this. And so fortunately it ended up where I had enough trim where I could overlap everything else by like a ½ inch, and that really just forces those edges to be parallel with one another and makes everything look a lot smoother. So I would work with them and make sure that you have enough, even just a ½ inch or an inch, that you can overlap all of your trims just to keep them from floating away from one another. Another detail that they went with that I am not too keen on is not having a drip stop here. So there is exposed wood right behind here. Normally there is a piece that goes underneath your roof steel and flaps over this fascia trim here, and it has like a drip stop so it keeps water from getting up in there. With Hansen, they just have this like L-shaped trim that goes right there on the edge, and I just really don't think that that's enough to stop water from getting back up there and rotting your fascia. I'm caulking the crap out of everything on this edge here and hoping that it's going to be okay. In the future, I would definitely order the trim that goes up on the top over that, and we'll keep windblown rain from getting back there. We had a rainstorm the other day, and the wind wasn't even blowing that much, and we had drops all the way above where I expected to see them. So I would definitely recommend adding the cost of that extra trim up there. Additionally, with that trim, you'll notice here, if you can see it, that it's actually quite a bit lower than my soffit. It seemed, I don't know if there was a miscalculation or something, but it is too long for the board there, and I think it's because there was a miter that had to happen at the top of this in accordance with the roof slope. So I think that that's about the same as the gap that we see underneath here. So I think that that's the issue. That would go away if you bought that other trim that goes over the top of it and a shorter piece here. One of the other things that I don't particularly care much for is this detail right here. To have you put some of the trim that goes at the bottom here, up here, and the problem with that is that the back of it is not painted. And while I have a white building and that's not a big issue, I think what I've seen a lot of other people do that I think I like better is they have a piece of fascia trim that goes up in this corner here like that and will cover the edge of that soffit. So I'll put a photo in here that a friend from a post frame building Discord channel that I'm on recommended, and he has an alternate way of ending this corner that looked pretty nice that I would recommend you consider for your building. One of the things with the instruction manual that they didn't really do a great job of explaining that I could see anyway was how to do this corner trim. So I think they gave me enough where I could have run it up to the top of the roof there, but on their plan I didn't really know how exactly that works, so I just kind of did something a little different, and I think it turned out okay. This is kind of based on how Kyle at our buildings does his, and I think it turned out okay, but I don't think that this is how they intended for me to do it. So in summary, would I recommend that someone maybe doesn't have the most construction experience in the world but wants to try their hand at building their own garage or post frame, shop house, barndominium? Would I recommend Hansen Buildings? Yes, I definitely would. If you're building the type of building that I'm doing here, this was a great experience and I am so happy that I did. I do know that if you are making a more complicated building, things can get very expensive very quickly. I'm not exactly sure how the cost breakdown works there, but for this type of building, a pretty simple 40 by 72 single story building, it was absolutely worth it. And I think I would even consider going with them again at the very least for designing the blueprints of the building. Just because of how clear their blueprints were, I think I would want to at least work with them again on those in the future. I have a couple different things that I want to do as far as methods and materials. So if you decide to go with Hansen, maybe consider bringing those up, or you can just go with what they recommend. Obviously, it's worked out pretty good so far, and if a building like this is the worst case scenario, then I think that that's pretty all right. One thing I do really want to mention is even if you don't end up going with Hansen like we did, that you should absolutely check out their blog. There is so much great information in there for free, and regardless of who you end up going with, you should definitely check it out and you'll learn a ton. So definitely go check out their Pole Barn Guru blog. It's awesome. That's it. Thank you so much for joining in. Hope this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, let us know down in the comments. We are very active down in there, so I'm pretty confident that you'll have any questions that you have answered down in there. And if there's anything you would like to see more of, or hear more details about, let us know, and we'd be happy to go through here and address some of those things. As always, if this video was entertaining or informative for you, please hit that thumbs up as it helps us a great deal. And if you're into home building, DIY, light homesteading, or the debt-free lifestyle, then consider hitting that subscribe button as we have a lot of cool stuff coming up in the future. Even after our build, I'm actually more excited for the projects that we have planned after our build than the build itself. And those are the things I think are going to be not only applicable to the people who want to do this, but to way more people who are just interested in maximizing their life on a minimum budget. So without further ado, hope you guys have a great week. I'll catch you next time.